Welcome to The Scoop. I'm Diego Cordovez. Today we've got a very special guest. Very well known online is USCphildo with over 3 million in winnings, but now Phil Collins has made the final table of the main event of the World Series. November 9er, one of the favorites just based on his experience. And it's going to be really interesting to talk to him about how he got there and everything related to this huge opportunity. So you're at the November 9, 4th and chips, and in this World Series I heard you played a number of events and you just had like one small cash. Yeah. So you basically saved up all your mojo for the most important event.
That's what I was planning on doing actually the whole time. I think at some point later in June, whenever I was 1 for 15 or something like that, busted my 15th tournament, I tweeted saving it for the main event.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, or I used it as a hashtag.
Right.
Hashtag saving it for the main event, and I guess I was.
But I mean, in all seriousness, were you, when the main event started, were you physically exhausted or emotionally exhausted? Were you affected in any way? You've had enormous success in poker, so one poor World Series is not going to knock you down, but still, it's tough because there are so many events that by the time July rolls around, you're dazed, and now you've got the most important tournament coming up, and you can't help but be a little bit down when you've played a bunch of events.
Yeah. I had a lot emotionally invested into the main event. I knew that it was kind of the culmination of another poor year at the World Series if I busted this tournament. But I think that made me more focused and more determined to not make mistakes. Mm-hmm. And you're right, I've played a ton of tournaments online, so I know the swings of a 25 tournament sample size are ridiculous. You could go 0 for 25.
Doesn't mean anything.
I went 1 for 25, but I thought that I was playing well all summer. I didn't think that I was playing poorly. I thought that for the most part I just had some situational luck go the other way. I flipped for a 80K pot late in a 1K on day one, when there was no way I was going to get off. I had a nice stack, no way I was going to get off of it. But Dip Throng moved to my table, a very solid, aggressive player, and I had ace king and he had queens, and it was the money was going in no matter what. Yep. And he ended the day with 100,000, and I busted in the kind of the last level. And that was just kind of probably the biggest pot I lost, but that's just how the tournaments go sometimes. Right. And that's just how my summer was kind of going. If I'd won that flip, I would have gone deep in that tournament, and I didn't. Sure. And I was just hoping that whenever the hand started going my way, it would be for something special, and the main event, they all went my way.
This makes up for all the other tournaments, of course, if you can just pick one thing. So you did feel, though, that you were like extra focused, extra motivated, extra sharp going into the main event.
I didn't feel, it wasn't a drag. I didn't feel tired going into it. I was very sharp. I had been practicing most of the summer with the main event in mind. Like, how would I have played this differently in the main event when everyone has 30,000 chips to start and stuff like that?
It is interesting because you were playing mostly no-limit events, I assume.
Mostly 90% of them.
And these $1,000, $1,500 tournaments are like the diametric opposite of the main event. I mean, in terms of strategy, tactics, playing field, everything. In the main event, you can be anteing off chips, and even on the third day, you still have more big blinds than you start in one of these others, practically. Yeah. So you had a specific strategy in mind, I take it.
Yeah, I was very focused for a lot of the summer on what I was going to be doing in the main event in certain situations whenever setups would happen pre-flop. And the smaller fields, you just assumed the money was going in the middle. But I knew in the main event you have so much more time with the 2-hour levels, and you start with so many more chips. A lot of my thought process went into how not to lose really big pots whenever you're kind of coolered a little bit, or you run into another big hand with a big hand. What are the best ways that I can play a hand like ace king and 2 queens to not go broke if I get cooled off? And being able to play the main event that way, I think really helps the better players. If you have a good strategy, you can do extraordinarily more at the tables in the main event with all those chips than you can in the small events. So I knew that, hey, if you keep this up with the main event, everything could go your way in that tournament a lot easier than the crapshoot 1Ks and stuff.
Did you have, I mean, was it more of a, I mean, I know when they were down to 5 or 6 tables, you were one of the chip leaders, and obviously that gives you a lot of control, a lot of advantage. But was it pretty much a smooth ride, or were there some critical hands or critical moments along the way that could have gone either way?
There
Not
were
flips necessarily, but
there were
just
definitely
critical.
some big pots that I needed to win along the way over the course of 8 days, but they all seemed to go my way pretty much. I guess that's what it takes to get through. It's over 6,000 players.
Mhm.
But I was actually never all in and called in this tournament.
Yeah, fantastic.
That was kind of a goal of mine, and I was actually saying it to my friends because I thought I was playing great this summer. I said, you know what, in the main event, I won't have to get all in all the time. I'm just going to make the final table without ever being all in. And I was half joking, but I was pretty serious, and that was going to be my game plan, is to get on some chips and then build a big stack and then use it well. And I think I was able to do that. I did. I got it in good most every time I played a big pot, but then I had that one key hand that went my way on day 5. I got it in with ace-king against kings for about a 1.8 million pot, and it would have left me with a couple 100,000, and that went my way. I rivered a straight, and I had over 2 million, and kept going from there.
Smooth sailing from there on in.
I figured I'd have to have one really
Right.
defining moment that went my way, and once that happened, I was like, that might have been it. we might do it from here.
But even though your strategy fundamentally was not to put yourself at risk in coin flips or not to overbuild pots in precarious situations, it sounds like the other part of it was that you did want to accumulate chips early so that you could use the chips against other players.
Yeah,
it wasn't just a pure survival.
I definitely was doing my fair share amount of bluffing, but I made sure that any time I was in a marginal spot or I was bluffing in a pot that I would be in bad shape if I was called, I would leave myself room in case I lost. And the bigger pot or the bigger bluff that I was making, the more sure I was that it was going to work. I made some where I put in about half of my stack on a bluff. I did one on day 2 or 3, but I was just so certain whenever I was putting out that big bet on the turn that this was just absolutely perfect and I had to do it.
That's a really good
And
spot.
I knew that it wasn't my game plan to do that, but I also knew that I was going to be ready if I saw a good spot to take a hand away. And I think it was very sharp in whenever I was making moves and not losing those big pots when you're wrong. It's important.
I mean, one big difference, and most of your success and background's been online, but of course one big difference is that in a bigger online tournament, $1,000 buy-in or even $500 buy-in or these tournaments, you have a lot of regulars, a lot of strong players. Certainly as you get deep, you're going to be up against a lot of known players. And even though this is a $10,000 buy-in, there are a lot of weak players, and a lot of them are going to make it through. And certainly I'm assuming that part of your plan, and certainly the plan that developed, was that you had enough weak players at all your tables where, yeah, you may be bluffing, but it's in a spot where you're confident. And if it doesn't work, you can probably accumulate chips from the weaker players without, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like that's part of it.
Whenever I would do it, I'd take a lot of things into consideration. I knew that if this bluff worked, not only would I have more chips, but I knew that I could use these chips very wisely in the spot. And it wasn't just a whim. It was like early kind of in a day where we're going to have 3 more levels at a table that isn't going to break and that kind of thing. Where, wow, if this bot works for me, I'm going to be able to apply so much more pressure now. They're not going to want to get in hands with me because they just saw me, put in a couple of big bets. And you take all those things into consideration when you're at a weak table. It's a good time to definitely apply a lot of pressure. But then I had other tables where I'd have a pretty bad seat draw. I had Chris Moore on my direct left for most of the day on day 7, I think.
Right. That's very tough.
He's one of the better players in the world, I think. He plays such a very strong, aggressive game.
And he knows you, too.
And he knows my style, so
you've got to think on a
he
higher
knows
level
kind of
now.
where I'm going to be trying to play against him and how I'm going to be coming at him, which made it very difficult. But I knew that, hey, this isn't a one-day tournament or a one-level tournament. In those kind of spots, I tried to do the best I could, play my cards, and then later in the day, you get a good table redraw, and you can pick back up the pace. And that's kind of what happened. If I needed to cool my jets, I would.
But even with Chris Moorman, I mean, he also respects you a lot.
It's actually Chris Moore.
Oh, Chris Moore. Oh, Christopher Moore, right.
Moorman would have been even worse.
I was thinking, right.
But Chris Moore, he's a heads-up specialist who won the heads-up in L.A., and then the next year got second in it.
Right. But by the same token,
Same.
he respects your game. You're not his ideal opponent.
Yeah.
But now you're both having to think like on on a higher level in terms of what each of you knows about the other. And
so why just keep stepping up the leveling more and put yourself in maybe an awkward spot when you can just play a little bit more straightforward versus him and then take the chips from the bad players. And there were still plenty of bad players left deep in the tournament.
Thanks for joining us on The Scoop. And Phil Collins, predictably, has been very interesting, very articulate. So we have a lot more to talk about since he's in line to win the main event. And we're going to get more of his thoughts on that next week on The Scoop.